Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel and back to this week's video. For the next few videos we'll share some of the ancient and fascinating religious sites that haunt and romance the Shropshire area. The ruins of this Cistercian Abbey at Buildwas that sits in the stunning countryside with the imposing River Severn below and the beautiful historic towns of Much Wenlock and Ironbridge nearby. So join us whilst we take a walk around Buildwas Abbey. The impressive ruins of the abbey date as far back as the 12th century. What's interesting is here at Buildwas, much of the remains of the main building are still rather complete, that we don't think it's hard to imagine just how Buildwas Abbey would have looked in its heyday and functioned. In its time, the abbey withstood the murder of an abbot by one of its own monks. There were raiders from Wales pillaging its treasures and taking prisoner the abbot and the monks, and its estates being ravished during a Welsh uprising led by none other than Owain Glyndwr, as well as a decline in the economy and the arrival of the Black Death. So it was no wonder that unfortunately the abbey was closed in 1536 during the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII. Valuables were reserved for the king and the other disposables were auctioned off, with the monks dispersed out to other monasteries. In the summer of 1135, Roger de Clinton, who was the local Bishop of Coventry, brought a small group of monks from the Norman Abbey of Sauvigny to Buildwas to settle the area. It was around some 12 years later that Buildwas Abbey joined the Cistercian monastic family. And as the abbey grew more prosperous, new buildings were constructed, and the striking abbey church that we see today was built somewhere between 1150 and 1190. The abbey became very prosperous, particularly under Abbot Ranulph in the 12th century. Not much is known on his background or family, but what is known and can be seen is his energy and ability that has been left throughout the history of the abbey. The chapter house, the church and cloisters all appear from their design and from the detailing of decoration to have been built throughout his abbacy. Of 40 surviving books known to have belonged to the library here, over a dozen of them were written in the 12th century. Buildwas for Ranulph was a centre of learning with a considerable library, and he was the owner of many acres of peasant land which grew crops and housed cattle. When visiting the site, you are near enough always drawn to visiting the remains of the church first. You'll first notice the incredible columns which run to their full length, before looking at the crossing in the centre of the church. There aren't many records to tell us a lot about the progress of the construction work on the church, though the architectural evidence does suggest that it was begun around 1150 and may have finally completed around 1190. The design chosen was quite typical of the Cistercians from the 12th century onwards. One of the main draws at Buildwas lies in the fact that, unlike so many of the other abbey churches of this era, Buildwas remained largely unaltered throughout the later Middle Ages. From the north transept, we journeyed around the sacristy and bookroom. Down the steps into this section, it leads into a 2-bay vaulted chamber. There are 2 cupboards that are set into the north wall. In normal Cistercian layout, you might expect there to have once been a partition that would have separated the 2 bays. If this was the case here at Buildwas, then the west bay would have served as the bookroom, where some of the abbey's most important and fine collection of volumes could be stored for later use in the cloister, and the bay to the rear, entered by the steps like we did, must have been the sacristy, usually where the vestments and the altar cloths were kept in safety. Although much of Buildwas Abbey is in great condition, the chapter house is another notable part of the abbey that is in fantastic standing condition. It was the place where the monks would meet every single morning to review the rules of Saint Benedict and discuss abbey business, receive messengers and deal with all of the big and small matters arising in their community. An impressive doorway leads down into this chamber, and we can still enjoy the lovely vaulted roof that suits a room of such importance. One of the more notable things to see whilst in the chapter house is the tiled pavement. These existing tiles at the centre of the room are all Buildwas examples that have been placed here in recent decades. Like many religious communities in the mid-14th century, Buildwas suffered from poor monastic discipline, and as if to add insult to injury, in 1344 the abbey was also in debt. Then, in 1350, the abbey was raided by the Welsh, who stole its treasures and took the abbot and monks as prisoners. By 1377, the abbey had fallen on hard times, with only 6 monks making up its congregation. 4 years later, this number had fallen down to 4. The Welsh raided again in the early 15th century, and during the Wars of the Roses, the abbey lost land and had to lease property. Somehow Buildwas Abbey survived, only to head towards 1536 with its dissolution of the monasteries. Later, in 1537, Sir Edward Grey, Lord Powys, was given the abbey and almost all of its land and property in Shropshire, Staffordshire and Derbyshire. Although Buildwas Abbey had a good reputation and continued to prosper, monastic life wasn't always as peaceful as we might imagine. Our story starts in 1342, which wasn't a very good year for Buildwas Abbey, with foul play occurring and a series of events that would lead to a murder. The trouble began around 18 months earlier though, when a horrendous cattle disease struck Shropshire. This disease devastated the livestock population, with one manor not too far from the abbey seeing 62 of 154 cattle dead, and the rest of them too sick to give milk. It's not known how far this affected Buildwas Abbey's lands, but it was enough to call into question the actions of the abbot John Burnell, who was unrelenting with the pursuit of rent. The dispute eventually calmed after church officials were sent. However, the following year, things worsened after the crops failed. With no crops and the country still in the grips of a cattle disease, many of the peasants left their land in search of work further afield, or died, leaving acres of abandoned land. This was a real crisis and put immense pressure on the peasants that were left behind. At the abbey, it seems that Abbot Burnell refused to acknowledge these serious economic problems. He had no pity for the peasants and insisted that the abbey should still collect the full taxes of the abbey land, even if they were empty. He said he expected full rents and refused to allow any remission of fees or fines. The details of what follows are lost to time. However, it seems that the local peasants expressed their concern and found a voice in a junior monk by the name of Thomas Tong. Tong had sympathised with the peasants and wanted the abbot to start to act on the crisis. It's also said that the two clashed on a personal level. However, a meeting was arranged to discuss the growing conflict amongst the peasantry. This meeting was far from a pleasant affair. In fact, it quickly turned violent, which saw Thomas rashly stabbing the abbot to death. The Bishop of Coventry was called in to sort the mess out and had Thomas arrested. Being a monk, he was subject to church justice and escaped the death penalty. He was flogged, expelled from the church and ordered to go on a pilgrimage to gain forgiveness. A new abbot was appointed to Buildwas and the rent situation was resolved. However, this wouldn't be the end of Buildwas Abbey's strife. 5 years later, the Black Death struck the county, killing almost half of the population in Shropshire. The estate of Buildwas plummeted in value and was never really profitable again. To top it all off, Thomas returned to Buildwas Abbey. Having completed his pilgrimage, he was forgiven in the eyes of God and wanted to be a monk again. Thomas's return seemed all too much for the spirit of Abbot Burnell. After resting for 5 years, his ghost was soon seen walking the monastery grounds, unhappy at his killer's return. Thomas didn't stay at the abbey long. He was perhaps intimidated by his victim's spectre. But Abbot Burnell never gained rest. His spirit is still reported to wander the remains of the abbey, restless and understandably unhappy at his demise. To some he is said to be an uncomfortable presence, however, not to all. In the 1980s, Abbot Burnell's ghost was reported to walk alongside another otherworldly monk, and seemed to be at peace, giving off a calm presence. He has also been witnessed since, alone but appears in contemplation, and enjoying the serenity of the beautiful abbey ruins. We think this is a really important story, taking place in a period of great instability for Shropshire. It demonstrates a great deviation away from Christian morality, both Abbot Burnell's deviation from Christian charity and Thomas Tong's murderous intention. It can also be viewed as a contemporary criticism of church justice, which allowed murderers to escape real punishment, and portrays the abbey as a place of greed and violence, out of touch with the world around them. So we really hope that you've enjoyed this video and it's given some inspiration to maybe visit Shropshire. If you enjoyed the content, please hit the subscribe button, and why not give it a like as well. If you'd like to see more content, then click the notification bell and never miss another video. We want to say a big thank you to everyone for watching, and to our Patreons and channel members for being fantastic supporters and joining the PIN family. So we'll see you on the next one. Till next time.